Let's start with a story from Native American tribes. After all, they were here first. They should get the first story. I found this story in a library book, an anthology of stories, and I like it because so many stories that we see portraying Native American culture, like in the film industry and all of that, they're so dead serious. You know, they never let the Indian character say anything except stuff like, "We are Indians. You took our land. That hurt our feelings. Go away and leave us alone." Well, I have plenty of friends who are Native American from lots of different tribes, and none of them stand like this and talk like that. They're regular people, and they have great senses of humor. This is a good story to demonstrate that. Once there was a group of men sitting around a campfire, and they were doing what men would do in any culture. They were bragging. One man was bragging that he had the strongest sons, and another man was bragging that he had the most beautiful wife. Well, there was one man sitting there who had never married. He had no wife, he had no sons, and he couldn't think of anything to brag about. And so finally he said, "Oh, I'm not afraid of anything." Well, just like that, all the other men sitting around the campfire started to name things that you ought to have a healthy fear of. And one said, "How about bear? You'd be afraid of a bear." And he said, "I'm not afraid of a bear. I'd shoot a bear in the eyeball with a bow and arrow. I'm not afraid of a bear." Another man said, "How about snakes? You'd be afraid of snakes." He said, "I'm not afraid of a snake. I'd pick a rattlesnake right up by the tail. I'm not afraid of snakes." But then someone issued the ultimate challenge and they said, "How about dead people? You'd be afraid of that. Ghosts, spirits." And he said, "I'm not afraid of dead people. I'm not afraid of ghosts and spirits." Well, there were many ghosts in that place. Just beyond the camp, there was a grove of trees at the base of a small mountain, and that's where the people buried their dead. And there were many spirits that hung about in the tree branches, and they heard this man bragging that he was not afraid of them. And they started to talk amongst themselves, and they said, "We should scare him. That's what we do, after all. We're spirits. We should scare him so badly that his hair turns white and he goes running to his mother, screaming like a little girl." Well, they all of a sudden heard this man bet his friends 10 horses that he could walk right through that haunted wood and not be the least bit frightened. And so the spirits decided to have a bit of a contest themselves. They would see who could scare him most. 3 of the spirits changed their form and they took on the shape of skeletons. Nothing more frightening to a man really than a skeleton, because when he sees one, it reminds him that someday he too will be nothing but a pile of bones. And they spaced themselves out along the trail, and each spirit took his turn. Well, the man walked down the trail, and the first skeleton jumped out in front of him and started dancing around, clacking his big yellow teeth in his head. And the man said, "Really? That's supposed to scare me. I'm not the least bit frightened." "Oh, you should be afraid," said the skeleton. "You should be afraid because someday, man, you'll end up looking like me." And when the skeleton said, "Me," like that, he wasn't trying to be frightening at that point. He was shrieking out in pain because the man said, "I don't feel like being afraid. What I feel like doing is playing the hoop and stick game." And he grabbed the skeleton by the hands, and he grabbed him by the feet, and he bent the bones around in a circle. And then he snatched up some grass, and he used it like string to tie the circle together. And he said, "Now, look there, I got a nice hoop I can roll down the trail. I just need a stick to knock it along with." "I don't have a stick. Your leg bone will do." And he reached in and snapped out the leg bone of the old skeleton and started knocking the hoop down the trail. And the skeleton was crying, "Oh, ow, ow, stop it, man. Oh, ow, you're killing me." "Kill you? How could I kill you? You're already dead." And he knocked the bones over the side of the hill and went on his way. Well, the next skeleton waited until the man was past his hiding place, and he jumped out from behind him, threw his bony arms right around his neck, and whispered in his ear, "Hello, cousin. Let's dance." "Yes," said the man, "let's dance. I didn't bring my drum. We're going to need a good drum beat for a dance. I'll just knock on the side of your head." And he started knocking on the skeleton's skull. "Ow! You're giving me a headache." That couldn't possibly hurt. There's nothing in there. He kept knocking on the skull until the head bone broke off and it rolled over into the weeds, and all the other bones tumbled down into a pile. You could hear the head bone calling from the weeds, "Put me back together." "Put yourself back together." "That'll take forever." "It'll give you something to do." And he went on down the trail. Well, the third spirit saw this wasn't going very well, and so he tried to be extra frightening. He rode out onto the trail, sitting on the back of a spirit horse, and with glowing red eyes, the skeleton said, "Climb up on my horse and ride through the shadows of death with me." "I don't feel like riding through the shadows of death," said the man. "What I feel like doing is going for a sled ride. Look, over there on that mountain, there's a nice bank of snow. If I had some big buffalo ribs, I could make sled runners and I could go sliding. I don't have any buffalo ribs. Your ribs will have to do." And he reached up and snapped the rib cage right out of the old skeleton, and when he snapped its rib cage out, its head bone fell right down against its butt bone. "Oh, I look ridiculous. Put my ribs back." "You want your ribs? Go get them yourself." And he threw the ribs into the river. What'd you do that for?" "Well, you stink. You should jump in the river and take a bath." "I don't want to take a bath." "Your old woman would appreciate it if you took a bath." "I am a woman. You're a skeleton. Who could tell?" And he knocked the bones off the top of the spirit horse, climbed up on its back, and rode it all around the camp. Everyone was watching. In the morning, when the sun came up, the spirit horse melted away, and the man who was not afraid of anything was sitting there in the grass, laughing and laughing, and the people started to whisper one to another, saying, "He truly is not afraid of anything. We should make him our leader." They all gathered round, and someone said, "We will call you He Who is Unafraid." A little girl walked up to the new leader, and she said, "He Who is Unafraid, you're not scared of bear?" "Nah." "And you're not scared of snakes?" "Uh-uh." "And you're not even afraid of spirits?" "Weren't you watching?" "That's good. You will be a brave leader for us. Oh, He Who is Unafraid, there's something crawling on your neck. It has 8 hairy legs and little red eyes. It looks—" "Get it off! Get it off! Get it off!" And the man who was not afraid of anything went running into the woods, and they never saw him again. And that was the end of that. Now, Native Americans are not the only tribal people with a history in these United States. Due to the forced immigration of Africans during the American slave trade, there were many tribal people from Africa who made their life here, and they told stories too. They often would take African stories that used to be about lions and hyenas and elephants or whatever, and over a course of time, those stories would become Americanized with other animals like raccoons and alligators, and of course, our good old friend, Brother or Brer Rabbit. Brother Raccoon, old Brother Raccoon, he was starved to death and he wanted to eat. And you know what he was going to eat? He's going to eat himself a big pan full of frog legs. "Aw, if you ain't like frog legs, that's 'cause you ain't hungry. Mama say hunger be the best sauce." Whoo, Brother Raccoon, he loved to eat frog legs. But frogs is hard to catch, you know. You go down the riverbank, you try to clap your hand on top of them frogs, and they go hop away from you. Brother Coon figured if he gonna catch a frog, he'd have to sneak up on him. Ooh, he knew how to sneak up on a frog. He put his mask on all around his eyes. Then them frogs couldn't see him coming. He grabbed up a bucket and he started down the path toward the riverbank. Of course, the frogs ain't stupid. They seen Brother Raccoon. He had a mask on around his eyes, but the rest of him looked like big fat Brother Raccoon. They saw him coming from a long way off. Big old bullfrog sitting up on the riverbank. He warned all of his friends. He kept saying, "Here he comes, here he comes, here he comes." All little frogs saying, "Ooh, here he come, ooh, here he come." And they ploop, jumped in the river water and swam away. Well, when Brother Coon got down the riverbank, there ain't no frogs. They all hiding underneath the river water. Ooh, that made him mad. He threw his bucket down on the ground. He sat down on top of that overturned bucket. He started fussing to himself, said, "I ain't never gonna catch no frogs. I tried to catch a frog, that big mouth bullfrog. Say, here it come, here it come." My wife at home, she got a pan full of empty. She ain't got nothing to cook us. Here it come, here it come. About that time, here come Brother Rabbit down the road. He saw his friend. He said, "Hey, Brother Raccoon, how your family and all your people?" He said, "My people about half starved to death. That's why my people, my babies are crying. They at home because their mama ain't got nothing to cook, or their daddy can't catch no frogs." Said, "Here it come, here it come, here it come." Brother Rabbit said, "Oh, now, Brother Coon, it ain't as bad as all of that. I can help you catch them frogs. I got a good plan for frog catching. But you got to do everything I say. Can you act like you're sick? Brother Coon said he could act sick. Can you act like you're real sick? Brother Coon said he could act real sick. Good, good. Can you act like you're dead? I ain't want to be dead. No, you ain't got to be dead. You just going to act like you're dead. Well, Brother Coon said he could act dead, but how in the world was I going to catch any frogs? Brother Rabbit told him just to play along. So Brother Coon, he went into play acting. Ooh, Brother Coon, is you sick? Ooh, you don't look so good. Look at them dark circles under your eyes. Ooh, afraid you're going to be dead. Old Brother Coon fell over like he was stiff dead. Now, as soon as he fell over and pretended to be stiff dead, Brother Rabbit pretended to be in mourning. Ooh, Brother Coon, ooh, he dead. Ooh. Well, when he started crying, all those frogs started to float up on top of the river water to see who was carrying on. So when he saw all the frogs looking at him, he had a really good audience. Oh, then he really turned it on. Ooh, he dead. First he was a little sick, and then he got a lot sick, and then... Well, the frogs, they felt sorry for Brother Rabbit, his best friend, dying so sudden like and all. They wanted to know if there was anything they could do to comfort him. Brother Rabbit said, well, my friend Brother Raccoon, he just loved the riverbank, so I wish we could just dig him a grave right here on the banks of the river so he could rest in peace. Well, those frogs went and grabbed their little frog shovels and they started digging. Soon, they had a big old hole down there on the riverbank. Little frogs down the bottom of that hole, they were leaning on their shovels. Now, the big bullfrog, he was the boss man foreman for the job. So he asked Brother Rabbit, is it deep enough? Is it deep enough? Brother Rabbit said, can you frogs jump out? Well, those little frogs, they threw down their shovels and whoop, they jumped right out the top of that hole, started to hop away. Brother Rabbit said, oh, it's not deep enough. Oh, they didn't want him to start crying again. So they jumped back in that hole and went to digging. Soon they had a big, deep hole. You could bury Brother Coon 2 or 3 times over. Little frogs down the bottom of that hole, they done wore themselves out. They were leaning on those shovels saying, is it deep enough? Is it deep enough? Brother Rabbit said, can you frogs jump out? Ooh, they done dug the hole too deep. They would hop up, flop right back down, hop up, flop right back down, trap themselves in the bottom of that hole. Oh yeah, said Brother Rabbit, that'll be deep enough. Not for raccoon burying, but for frog catching. Okay, Brother Raccoon, you get up. Whoop! It was a miracle. Brother Raccoon, he was alive, resurrected from the dead. Ooh, and there were frogs. He scooped up all those frogs, carried them home in his bucket, and fried their legs up for his supper, and that was the end of that. I began with a story from Native American tribes, and then I told one from African peoples, tribal people who were brought to the United States. And of course, the dominant culture in the early United States was European, mainly English. However, the English tended to borrow a lot of the stories, particularly stories they told their children, from the Italians, the Italian zany stories. So let me tell you a story that would have been very popular in colonial America. In fact, Mr. Benjamin Franklin may have very well known a version of this story. Madonna Francesca, she was a bella. That means she was very good looking. Beautiful lily, white skin, long black hair, ruby red lips. Whenever she would go walking down the street in her village, all the men would stop whatever they were doing and start to yell and whistle. Woo, Madonna, she is a bella. Very nice, very nice. But Madonna Francesca paid no attention to those men. There was something wrong with every single one of them. Too fat, too ugly, too stupid, too lazy. She wanted nothing to do with them. You girls know what I mean. To be so beautiful and not another boy anywhere in the 5th grade that you want to even sit next to. So Madonna Francesca was very lonely. At night, you might pass by her house and see her sitting in a window high up in the tall stories of her home, combing her long, black, beautiful hair. She would look out of the window and glance down over her rose garden and sigh. Very lonely. Now, the men of the village never gave up on trying to get Madonna Francesca to fall in love with them. If they saw her seated in the window looking out over her rose garden, they would step into the garden and they would serenade her. They would sing to her, trying to get her to fall in love with them. There was one man who always came to the rose garden to sing. His name was Luigi. In English, his name would be Louis. And Luigi would step into the rose garden and he would sing. Well, before I tell you what he would sing, I should say that Luigi would have made a good husband, except he was a nose picker. Always picking his nose. And he would stand there in the rose garden and he would sing, "Oh, Belladonna Francesca, you are the one I love." Oh. Not only was he a nose picker, he could not sing. And she would sing back to him, "I cannot love you, you are ugly. Go away from my window now, go away from me. You're a nose picker. Shoo! Ew. Oh, and wash your hands." Well, as soon as Luigi would go away, then Giuseppe would show up. His name in English would be Joseph. Giuseppe, he was a rich man. He would make a good husband, yes? No, because he was smelly. That kind of smelly. Oh, it was very bad. Every night, he would step into the rose garden, he would look up to the window, and he would sing, "Oh, Belladonna Francesca, you are the one I love." Oh, and the roses would wilt. It was just awful. And she would sing back to him, "I cannot love you, you are hideous. Go away from my window now, go away from us. You're a stinker." Ugh. Well, there was a third man in the village. His name was Scarpia. Now, Scarpia was not a nose picker, and he was not smelly. Scarpia only had one big problem. He was dead. Yep, he was dead. You know what killed him? Ugliness. He was so ugly, he died from it. Oh, he had big schnauzula ugly. He saw his own face in the mirror and fell right over dead. He was so ugly, when they laid him out, dressed him for his funeral, people would walk by and they would say, "Oh, it's such a tragedy, poor Scarpia." And when they looked at him right in his big schnauzula ugly face, they would fall over in a faint. You couldn't stand to look at him, he was so ugly. When they buried him, they would not bury him in the regular churchyard. No, because nobody wanted to be buried next to such an ugly man someday. So he was buried far out of town at the Church of the Lesser Friars, where poor people and strangers were buried. When Madonna Francesca heard this news, how ugly Scarpia was, and where he was buried and all, she knew how she could use it to get rid of Luigi and Giuseppe once and forever. The next night when Luigi came to her window to sing, she said, Luigi, please, don't sing. I have a big problem. Very, very bad. My dear Uncle Scarpia." And she had to keep from laughing, because he really wasn't her uncle. "My dear Uncle Scarpia, he's dead and buried, far, far away. It's too far for me to go and visit his grave. But if you would go and dig him up and bring him and bury him here in my rose garden because you do this favor for me, I would marry you." Ooh. Luigi didn't want to dig up a dead man, but then Madonna Francesca said they could get married. That's what he wanted more than anything in the world. So he grabbed a shovel and he ran off to the Church of the Lesser Friars. Now, as soon as he was gone, Giuseppe showed up, and she told Giuseppe the same thing. "Giuseppe, please, don't sing. I have a big, big problem. Very bad. My dear Uncle Scarpia, oh Scarpia, he was a handsome man." And she had to keep from laughing, because he was not handsome. "He's buried far, far away. It's too far, and go see his grave. If you would go and dig him up and bring him here, bury him in my rose garden because you do this favor for me, I would marry you." Well, Giuseppe could marry the love of his life. Madonna Francesca, all he had to do was relocate a grave. This was going to be easy. He grabbed a shovel, and he too ran off to the Church of the Lesser Friars. Now, of course, Luigi got there first, so he had done all the hard work. He had dug down, 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 until clank, his shovel hit an iron coffin lid. He creaked open the lid of the coffin and pushed it up onto a pile of dirt. He jumped down into the grave to pick up old Scarpia, and when they looked at him right in his big schnauzula ugly face, he fell over in a faint and landed face down right on top of the old dead corpse. Well, just about that time, Giuseppe came down the road. He saw an open grave, the coffin lid already removed. his work was half done. He jumped down into the grave to pick up Scarpia, and there was a man laying face down. He thought it was a strange way to bury someone, but maybe that's the way he preferred it. He did not realize that he was looking at Luigi by mistake. Now, Luigi was not dead. It was Scarpia who was dead. Luigi, he was only passed out like he was dead, but he was not dead. It was Scarpia who was dead. Big Snowzilla Ugly dead, you know? So he grabbed Luigi by mistake, threw him up over his shoulder, started up the road, and when he started up the road, a constable, like a policeman, stepped out into the street, and he saw an open grave, a man carrying what looked like a dead body, and he yelled out, "Ah, stop, grave robber!" Ah! He jumped behind a tree. When Giuseppe jumped behind a tree, he banged Luigi's head on the tree trunk, and it brought Luigi around. Ow! My head! Ah! A dead man! He talks! He threw Luigi down, took off running down the road. Luigi jumped up, and the constable said, "Ah! A dead man! He walks!" The constable ran in one direction. Luigi ran in a third. Madonna Francesca sat in her window watching these three idiots tearing round and round the village. They scared each other all half to death, and they ran away, and she never had to be bothered with any of them ever again. And that was the end of that. Eventually, as territories in the United States were settled, our storytelling style started to change. Rather than borrow, some people might say steal, stories from other cultures, we started to develop our own storytelling style, but we were still dependent on ideas from faraway places. The Scotch-Irish and the Welsh and the English, they moved up into the Appalachian Mountains, and they remembered stories from their home countries, but over generations, as the stories got told and retold, they started to take on more and more and more of an American and Appalachian flavor. Jack, he was out working in his field. He had him a mule, and he'd been plowing all morning. It's getting on to the heat of the day, and Jack, he is out there working hard. And all of a sudden he looked up, and running down the road come his big brothers, Will and Tom. The sweat was a-flying off their forehead, and they was a-hollering and a-yelling and a-waving their arms, and they still far enough away Jack couldn't hear what they was a-talking about. So he put his mule with its plow over under a shade tree and let him rest a while, and he went over there to the barbed wire by the end of the field next to the edge of the road. Will and Tom come running up to him. They was a-huffing and a-puffing. They was worked up to a fare you well. They said, "Has anybody been around here?" And he said, "No, there ain't been nobody around here." And they said, "There ain't been nobody by to talk to you." He said, "There ain't been nobody a-talking to me. I'm plowing with a mule, and I'm standing at the wrong end of him for a quality conversation. What are you boys carrying on about?" And they said, "Oh, well, let us be the first to tell you. The king done declared a big old war, and every able-bodied man's got to go off and fight." And Jack said, "I ain't going off and fighting in no war." They said, "Well, now you got to if the king says you got to go." Jack said, "There's two reasons why I ain't going off and fighting in no war. And the first one, that's my dog named Sweet Lips." And they said, "Sweet Lips? You can't stay home on account of Sweet Lips." You see, Jack had him a blue tick hound dog. It's about half grown. It was a real purty little girl pup, and he had named it Sweet Lips, and he was going to train her to be a good hunting dog. He said, if I go off to the war, somebody else will get a hold of my dog, and they'll train her wrong, and she'll be cold trailing, and no, we can't have that. I'm staying home to train my dog." And they said, "You can't stay home on account of a dog." He said, "Well, I told you I had two reasons why I'm staying home. The first is my dog named Sweet Lips, and the second is a sweet-lipped girl named Sally." Oh, yeah. Old Sally McCormick, Judge McCormick's daughter. She is real purty. She's so purty it hurt your eyes to look at her. And Jack and Sally, they was madly in love, and they'd planned to get married. And Jack said, "If I go off to the war, some other fella will come courting my girl, and I ain't gonna have that." And they said, "You can't hide behind a woman. That's the very definition of a coward." Well, Jack knowed they was right. He's gonna have to go off and fight. There's no two ways about it. So he hatched him a plan. He got a string, and he tied it round Sweet Lips' neck so he could lead her along, and he got a double-barrel shotgun and flung it over his shoulder, and that evening he walked over to Sally's house. When he come up to the gate, Sally was a-setting out on the front porch swing. She seen him a-coming. She said, "Oh, Jack, did you come to whisper sweet nothings in my ear?" He said, "No, Sally, I didn't come to whisper sweet nothings in your ear." She said, "Ooh, did you come to sing me some purty love songs?" He said, nope, nope, I didn't come to sing you no pretty love songs. Sally, I have to go off and fight in a war. And while I'm gone, I brung you my dog here, Sweet Lips, and I want you to take care of her. And she said, Jack, I don't want to take care of that old mangy dog. He said, now, don't talk like that, Sally. This year's a good dog, and I want you to be good to her. I want you to feed her scraps from your table and let her sleep at the foot of your bed. And she said, well, Jack, on account I love you, I guess I could love your old dog. And he said, if any men come around here while I'm gone, you sick the dog on them. And she said, oh, that ain't gonna be no trouble. That ain't gonna be no problem at all, Jack. These eyes are only for you. He said, they better be only for me. And if the dog don't work, that's what I brung you this double-barrel shotgun for. She said, oh, I ain't gonna need no double-barrel shotgun to chase men off, Jack. These lips, they're only for you. And Jack said, just make sure you remember that. And he left that gun and that dog with his woman, and Jack went off to fight. Well, Jack was gone for the longest of time. That war drug on for years and years. And finally, when it was all done and over with, Jack was ready to come home. He was ready to get home to his girl, Sally, and his dog, Sweet Lips. And he didn't want to walk on the road. You know, that was going to take a long time to get home. He figured he'd get him a boat, put it in the river, and he'd get home faster that way. So he got in a boat in the river, and a big old storm blowed up. And the lightning was a-splitting the sky, and the thunder was a-shaking all around. And poor old Jack, he's down in the bottom of that boat praying for his very life. And when the storm passed and the sun come up, Jack had got blowed off course. He didn't know where in the world he was. So he put his boat over to the shore, and he figured he'd climb way up on the top of a mountain, and from up there he could see all across the land. He'd take a bear and know which way was back to home. Well, when he started up that mountain, he come to a big old cave. And when he walked through the mouth of that cave, the whole floor was covered over in bones. And at the back of that cave, there's a big old bed. It's big enough it would sleep 14 men. And Jack thought, oh, I've come to a land of giants. Now, Jack knowed a thing or two about giants, and he thought, they'll have treasure. If I could steal that treasure away from them, I could take it home to Sally for a wedding present. So Jack crawled up underneath that big 14-man bed to hide. And in just a little while, he heard a voice come in the mouth of that cave, and it was a saying, "Whoa, there's somebody right here." Jack peeped out from underneath that bed, and there's the biggest old booger man Jack had ever seen in his life. His legs was the size of tree trunks. He had big gangly arms a-flopping around, long scraggly hair hanging down the back of his head. And the queerest thing about that big old booger man was he had one big eyeball right in the middle of his forehead. And he was blinking around with that eyeball and sniffing with his nose. And he said, I smell my supper in here, and I know how I'm going to find him. And right behind that big old booger man come the biggest dog you ever seen in your life. It was a big old hound dog, but tall as a mule. And Jack thought, look there. Now that's a treasure if I've ever seen one. That mule dog would make a great present for Sally. There ain't nobody back where I live got a dog like that. Well, that dog all of a sudden run right over there where Jack was a-hiding beneath the bed, stuck its head up under the bed and grabbed hold of Jack and yanked him out. And that big old booger man grabbed up Jack and he said, "Oh, my dog caught you. He caught you. And now I'm going to eat you." And he started to pop Jack right in his mouth. And Jack said, wait. He said, I'm a stranger in your land, but where I'm from, folks don't never eat together unless they've been properly introduced. We should be introduced before you eat me." And that old big old giant, he said, "My name's Polyphemus. What might your name be?" And Jack said, I'm Nobody. He said, "Nice to meet you, Mr. Nobody. Now I'm going to eat you." Jack said, No. Not yet. He said, "Why not?" He said, "You don't want to eat me raw. That'll make you sick as a dog. You're supposed to stop me up on the end of a stick and roast me over the fire." That big old booger man, he said, "Oh, I forgot that." So he set Jack down, and he scraped together some sticks and some logs, and he got him a good roaring fire going. And then he grabbed up Jack, and he said, "All right, Mr. Nobody, I'm going to stop you up on the end of a stick, roast you over the fire, and then I'm going to eat you." And Jack said, "Not yet. You ain't ready yet. Ain't you never been to a hog butchering? You supposed to dip me in a pot of boiling water and scald all the hair off." He said, "Oh, I forgot that." So he set Jack down again, went and got him a pot, dipped him up some water from the river, set it up on that roaring fire, and pretty soon that pot was really hot and that water was a-bubbling and a-steaming. And he grabbed up Jack and he said, "Now, Mr. Nobody, I'm going to dip you in this pot and scald all your hair off, and then I'm going to stab you up on the end of a stick and roast you over the fire and eat you." And Jack said, "There's only one thing you lack, Daddy." He said, "What's that?" He said, "You got to pray and thank the Lord." Now, Jack knowed he had him there because he's old heathen. He didn't know nothing about prayer. So that old giant set Jack down. He said, "Now fold your hands up." He folded his hands up. He said, "Get down on your knees." That old giant got down on his knees. He said, and keep your eyeball closed, because you ain't supposed to be looking around while I'm a-praying. My brothers Will and Tom, they all the time are looking with one of their two eyes so they can snatch the best pork chop off the platter while I'm a-saying the grace. He said, "I only got one eyeball. I ain't going to be looking with it." He closed up his eye, and Jack, he started in a-praying. He prayed, and he prayed, and he prayed, and the whole time he is a-praying, he is fishing out a log from underneath that boiling pot. That log was red hot on the end and pointed just like a big fireplace poker. He hefted that log up on his shoulder, and he got right down in front of that giant, hunkered down on the ground. And he got to the end of his prayer, and he said, "Lead, guide, and direct us. Amen." And when that old giant popped his eyeball open, Jack shoved that log right in his eye. You could hear that eye sizzling and a-popping like an egg in a fry pan. That old giant jumped up, and he was yelling, "Oh, oh, oh, you blinded me." And then he flung his arm to the side and hit a big old rock, and it rolled right across the mouth of the cave and stopped it up. And Jack thought, "Shoot, I was going to blind him and then snatch that dog and run off, and he's knocked that big rock right in front of the door of the cave, and I can't get out of here." And that old giant, he is a-hollering and yelling so, all them other giants in the land heard him, and they come a-climbing over the ridges of the mountain, and they come up to that rock stuck in the mouth of his cave, and they hollered, "Polyphemus, Polyphemus, what you a-hollering about?" And he yelled out, "Nobody's hurt me, nobody's hurt me." They said, "Well, if nobody's hurt you, lay down and be quiet and go to sleep. You're disturbing our rest." And they went off and left that poor old giant there with that log stobbed up in his eyeball in the middle of his forehead. Well, Jack didn't know what he's going to do, and then that dog become his salvation. It run over there where that rock had stopped up the mouth of the cave and started sniffing and scratching around, and that big old booger man said, "My dog needs to go outside and make water agin a tree. I'm going to move this here rock that I'm a-feeling out of the way of the cave and let him go, but if I feel anybody go out behind him, I know it's you, Mr. Nobody, and I'm going to kill you dead." So Jack, he jumped right up underneath that dog, just throwed himself right up against the belly of that dog and wrapped his arms and legs around it and held on real tight. And when that dog went a-trotting out, that old giant felt that dog's head and its back, but he didn't know Jack was riding underneath. Well, Jack rode that dog right down to the river, and he thought, "I'm going to take this dog home to Sally." So he set that big old mule-sized dog up in the front of his boat, and he got in the back, and he went to paddling. Well, they went on down the river a ways, and there on the bank, there's a big old white tent, because there's a revivalist set up, and he is a-preaching to folks. Well, Jack put his boat into the shore, and he is a-listening to the preaching. And then that preacher man left the tent, and he come down there where Jack was a-setting the boat, and he had a great old big Bible, and he is a-thumping on that Bible. He looked at Jack, and he said, "Son, are you saved?" Jack thought about that one-eyed booger man he got away from. He said, yes, sir, I reckon I've been saved." And then that man said, "I don't know where you're bound, stranger, but as soon as you leave these parts, you're going down the river here, you're going to come around the bend, and the river's going to fork. And you got to be real careful which way you're going to choose to go. On one side, the water's just as clear and smooth as mirror glass, and there's pretty willow trees a-hanging down on the bank, and it just looks like a most peaceful place. And then on the other side, there's all kind of jagged rocks and dips and whirls and shoals and little waterfalls and things. Looks real dangerous, and you're going to have to pick which way you're going to go." Jack said, "I think I've read about this in that book that you're preaching from. There is a way that seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof is death." He said, that's right, son. If you go over there on that real smooth water where it's real purty, there's old witch woman's got her house set up behind them willow trees on the river bank, and she's going to be watching for you, looking for you through the eye of her needle. And she's going to see you coming, and she's going to set up a song, Jack, and it's going to go high and low and straight to your soul, and you'll be drawn right over there. But it's a trick, Jack, it's a trick. Right next to them willow trees, the river forms into a big old suck, and you'll get pulled down and you'll be killed. Well, Jack, he didn't want to get killed in a suck, But to hear a song that would go high and low and straight to a feller's soul, now that was something he wanted to hear. So he jumped out of the boat right quick and he grabbed up some moss from the riverbank and he stuffed it in that big mule dog's ears. And he throwed that dog out in front of his boat and took a rope and wrapped it round that dog's neck, and he sat in the boat and he let that dog start a dog paddling like it was a pulling that boat, like a mule might pull a wagon, only they's in the water. And that dog went to paddling along, and Jack held onto them ropes. And Jack, he had gotten that moss stuck up in that dog's ears so it couldn't hear that old witch woman singing. But Jack heard her. Oh, yes, and it was a song that went high and low and straight to his very soul. And he is a-leaning over the edge of that boat. He's almost ready to pitch himself out and swim right toward them willow trees. But then that dog went, "Oh!" and turned and went right down through them dips and shoals and betwixt them jagged rocks and saved Jack's life. Well, finally, Jack got home. And he took that dog and he headed right straight down the road toward Sally McCormick's house. He put that dog over in the woods because he wanted to save it for a surprise. And when he got up to her front gate, what do you think he saw? But there was Will and Tom a-settin' in the porch swing with Sally betwixt 'em. They had lied to Jack. They had sent him off to the war, and they had stayed home and tried to steal his girl. Will was a-whispering to Sally, and she kept saying, "Oh, Will, stop saying things like that. If you keep that up, we're going to have to get married." And Tom had a fiddle up on his shoulder, and he was making all kind of pretty songs, and she kept saying, "Oh, Tom, them's the prettiest love songs I ever did hear." Jack hollered from the gate, and he said, "Sally, it hurts me in my heart to see you two-timing with my brothers like that." Sally looked out to the gate. She didn't recognize Jack on account he'd been gone so long. His hair's all straggling, his clothes is ragged. She said, "I don't know how you come to know my name, old beggar man, but go around behind the house and my mama will get you some food if that's what you're after." He said, "I ain't no beggar man, Sally. I ain't after no food. I'm after you. I'm your man, Jack." Well, Sally jumped up out of that swing. She said, "I don't know if you're my man Jack or not, but there's one way to find out." She went in the house and she come back with that double-barreled shotgun. She said, "My man give me this shotgun to chase fellers off, but the hammers is so stiff on it, I never could pull 'em back. I reckon if you're the man you say you are, you'd be able to cock this gun." Jack snatched that gun out of her hands and went click, click. He aimed both barrels right at his brother Will, and he said, "Will, where's my dog?" Old Will started in, "Well, Jack, you know, you's gone an awful long time, and we thought maybe that you got killed in the war." Jack stuck his fingers in his mouth and whistled real loud, and here comes Sweet Lips trotting around the end of the house. Oh, Lord, them brothers of his'n, they had kicked and beat and starved that dog till it was nearly dead. Jack looked at Will and he said, "It's one thing to try to steal a man's girl, and it's quite another to abuse his dog." Boom! And he took a shot, and old Will jumped up out of that swing and tore off down the road, and Jack throwed that gun down, and he snatched that fiddle out of Tom's hands and put it up to his shoulder, and he played a song that went high and low and straight to Sally's soul. And she said, "Oh, Jack, it is you." Old Tom, he slunk off right behind his brother Will because he knowed Jack had bested him. And Jack and Sally, they got married and had all kind of puppies from them two dogs they got together and sold every one of them for $500 each. And Jack and Sally, they are independent rich. Eventually, settlers in these United States started heading west. And by the time the West was settled, after the Civil War, we had started to create our own storytelling style. No longer were we borrowing fairy tales and zany stories from Italy and other European countries. We were not telling Native American ghost stories. I mean, the Native Americans, of course, were still telling them, but we weren't just dependent on those types of stories. We weren't having stories from Africa. We started to develop a folklore that was uniquely American, called the Tall Tale. People tell all kinds of stories all around the world, but Americans are famous for taking a little bit of truth and stretching it into something absolutely ridiculous. Basically, Americans can lie better than anybody else on the planet. So I want to conclude by telling you 3 short, tall tales. There are these 3 cowboys sitting around the campfire, and they were talking about the comforts of home. They'd been out on the range for weeks and weeks, and they were missing the comforts of home. One of them said, "I sure do miss my wife. She's a pretty little woman and a good cook. I ain't had me a good home-cooked meal in I don't know how long." Another cowboy said, "I ain't never been married, but I got me a girlfriend, and I miss my girlfriend. She's a good kisser. I ain't had me a good smooch in a long time." Third cowboy sat there thinking about wives and girlfriends. He'd had some of both. Finally, he said, "I sure do miss my dog." "Your dog?" "Yeah," he said, "I got the best dog you ever seen in your life." They said, "We ain't got nothing better to do. Tell us about your dog." He said, "Well," he said, "I left him back at home for safekeeping, but he's the best hunting dog you ever seen in your life. I trained that dog to hunt so good, he could tree a squirrel, he could chase raccoon and run deer. That dog could even fish. He'd sock his head right underneath the water and snatch a catfish right out of the mud. That's the best hunting dog you ever seen. One day I was down at the sawmill, and I had some big logs, and I was pushing them through the cradle saw, and they're going whang, coming out boards on the other end. And my dog was running around the weeds looking for something to hunt. And all of a sudden, I heard him start singing, "Oh, oh, oh," and he was running a rabbit. He run that rabbit right round and around the sawmill, over and over, 3-4 times. I seen what he's going to do. He's going to run that rabbit till it started to get tired and slow down some. And then he'd take a shortcut and run right through the middle of the sawmill, jump across the saw, and phew, snatch that rabbit when it come around the other side. Well, my dog tripped when he jumped, and he come right down in the middle of the saw, and the blade cut my dog right in two. There's a hind end of my dog laying there, jerking and a popping, and the front end of my dog laying on the other side, and he's going, "Arr, arr, arr." Needless to say, he's hurt pretty bad. Well, I couldn't live without my dog, best hunting dog I ever had in my life. So right quick, like, I snatched up both halves of the dog, and I slapped them back together, and I tore my shirt off, and I wrapped it around that dog and tied it up real good and tight, like a bandage. And by morning, that dog was better. Oh, yeah. When we took the bandage off, he had a big naked place right around the middle where the saw blade had buzzed his hair off. But other than that, he was fine. Except in my hurry to get that dog stuck back together, I'd slapped his hind end on upside down. It's the dumbest thing you ever seen. Hind end sticking straight up in the air and 2 legs flip-flopping back and forth like windshield wipers on the truck. Whenever that thing would go past a fire hydrant or a stump, look out. But that turned out to be a good thing, because now my dog can run rabbits twice as long as he used to could. He runs on his front legs a while, and then when he gets tired, he flips over and runs on his back ones. One of them other cowboys said, "Shut up." He said, "If that's what we're going to do," he said, "I can top you." He said, "You got a dog with its hind end on upside down. That don't mean nothing." Back at home in Louisiana, I had me a pet crocodile once. A crocodile? He said, yeah, crocodile's right rare reptile. It's got an alligator head on one end and a crocodile head coming off the other end. They said, "There ain't no such a thing." He said, "Oh, yeah, there is." He said, "I'd show it to you, except I sold it to P.T. Barnum's traveling show." Well, they sat there thinking about it, and finally one of them cowboys said, "Now look, if you got a thing that's got an alligator head on one end and a crocodile head coming off the other end, I don't mean to be talking nasty or anything, but how's that thing go to the bathroom?" That cowboy laughed and he said, "It don't, and that's what makes him so mean." Third cowboy said, "Aw." He said, "I can do better than both of you. You got that crocodile thing, dog with its hind end on upside down. That don't mean nothing." He said, "I knew a man once," he ain't with us no more, "but I knew a man once had himself a Christian horse." A Christian horse. He said, "Oh yeah, his horse got old and died and he needed a new horse to ride. Well, he looked in the newspaper and there's a preacher man had horses for sale. So he went over to that preacher man's farm and he asked if he could buy one of them horses. And the preacher said, 'I'll sell you a horse, but I raise my horses with religion.' And the cowboy said, 'I don't think that makes any difference.' He said, 'Oh, no. He said, 'I'm going to sell you a Christian horse.' He said, 'You know how you got horse training words like giddy up and whoa and all like that? That don't mean nothing to a Christian horse. You got to use sanctified language like I use when I'm preaching at the church house. For instance, if you want the horse to run, you don't say giddy up. You say, 'Praise the Lord, get out.'" He said, No, I'll show you. And that preacher man hollered out, "Praise the Lord!" The horse took off running. Clippity-clop, 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 right round and around the corral. He said, "You want to run faster? You say it again. Praise the Lord!" Clippity-clop, clippity-clop, clippity-clop. He said, "Now, if you want the horse to stop, you say something else. You know how a preacher will pray, and they pray on and on and on, and finally, when they get done praying, they say, Amen. That's how you get the horse to stop." Well, that cowboy tried it out, and he said, "Amen." The horse went, clippity-clop, stop. He said, "Oh, that's a smart horse." He said, yeah, and he ain't never going to kick you or bite you on account he's sanctified. He's a Christian. So he gave him $50 for that horse, and he climbed up on its back, and he rode off down the road. Well, wouldn't you know, as soon as that cowboy left that preacher man's farm, there's a big old bumblebee lit on that horse's rump and stung it right hard, and that thing took off running like a wild Mustang. Boom, 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 boom. That cowboy's a bouncing on its back, and he was yelling, "Whoa! Whoa!" And all of a sudden, it come to his mind. He thought, "Oh yeah, Christian horse, I got to use sanctified language." But he didn't know the right words. He just yelled out everything he'd ever heard religious folks talk about. "Glory! Hallelujah! I got the Spirit! Whoa!" And worse than anything, they is headed for a big mountain cliff, and if they pitched over that mountain cliff, both their necks would be broke, and then they'd be killed. All of a sudden, it come to his mind, and at the very last second, he yelled out, "Amen!" And that horse slid to a stop right at the edge of that mountain cliff. Whew. Cowboy's so glad to have his life saved, he yelled out, "Woo! Praise the Lord!" And that was the end of that.